A young love story that once seemed beautiful spiraled into a horrifying nightmare. Jealousy, violence, and deadly conspiracies led to the tragic end of Heather Strong, a woman who only wished for a peaceful life for herself and her 2 children. Dark secrets, chilling confessions, and bitter tears inside the interrogation room will all be revealed. How could love transform into such brutal hatred? Join us as we uncover the full, shocking story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to never miss our most compelling videos and receive exclusive rewards reserved for our loyal community.
Are your kids here? You mind if you step in? Okay. Is it a boy? A girl? What?
A boy.
A boy. What's the boy's name?
Anthony.
Okay. See if you can get a name.
Is there anything?
Well, we got a call want us to check on the well-being of the 4 to 5 year old kid.
How many kids are good?
Okay.
Basically, it's kind of messed up the whole situation, but my brother told me something, and I just can't sleep at night. He told me that something happened with one of the kids.
What I just said? Crazy. I don't know. What minute you got actually, all right, love you too.
I love you. Yeah, I hear you, baby.
Hey.
Yeah.
Okay, love you too.
Mwah.
Love you.
Love you again. I love you. Yeah. Okay, I love you.
He's had custody of her, but she just had a little girl named Mia.
Okay.
And then I guess she's pregnant again.
Yeah.
They all have different daddies.
Okay. So the other 3, the oldest 3 are, well, the 16-year-old, the 19-year-old.
Angel.
They're with their
Family.
fathers.
Angel
families.
is with his daddy. Gilbert is with his grandmother.
And then Nevaeh is with
Dad.
Christopher Upton.
Yes.
Okay. And then the other 5 are in custody
Yes.
of children's
Well, 4
services.
because.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And she is pregnant again. Is that from Christopher?
I'm pretty sure.
She used to use a website called mocospace.com. She had an app on her phone.
Is it MOCO?
Yeah.
MOCO space?
Yeah, it's basically MySpace. Big percentage of the popularity on that is Hispanic guys and women. But you'll have your here and there other races. But yeah, it's a big Hispanic thing.
Like a hookup site?
Pretty much. That's what she explained it as. It's for Hispanic people. It's like a MySpace for Hispanics.
Gotcha. And that's how she met this guy?
Yeah. That's how she met Chris too. Was Facebook with him.
Okay.
That's what I was told.
How many kids do you have?
I have 9 altogether,
Okay.
but I have some that don't live with me. But these are the ones that do live with me.
Okay.
Marion County, a peaceful and charming area nestled in north-central Florida, is blessed by nature with clear lakes, endless meadows, and winding country roads shaded by lush green trees. If someone were to visit Marion County on a mild summer day, they might easily imagine this place as an ideal setting for a quiet, serene life, far away from the noisy chaos of big cities. The locals here are accustomed to waking up each morning greeted by the cheerful sounds of birds chirping and gentle whispers of leaves rustling in the breeze. Daily life in Marion County seems consistently tranquil, evoking a comforting sense of ease for anyone who calls it home. Residents here cherish their peaceful existence, showing kindness and readiness to help their neighbors in need. Every weekend, they often gather together, sharing stories, laughter, and cups of warm coffee in cozy gatherings. Yet, even in the most serene and idyllic places, darkness can sometimes linger unseen. Occasionally, the most picturesque settings can become the backdrop for the most haunting of stories. One unexpected day, Marion County became the scene of one of the most horrifying crimes ever committed in this quiet community. This tragic event not only shook the local population but also left a lasting psychological scar, forever engraved in the memories of those who knew the people involved. Before delving deeper into the details of this tragic case, we wish to caution viewers that the following content contains sensitive descriptions and imagery that may profoundly impact certain audiences. If you are easily disturbed by details involving violence or severe criminal acts, please carefully consider your decision to continue watching. We assure you that our presentation intends solely to provide a clear, truthful, and objective account of the events, aiming to raise public awareness of the hidden dangers lurking within seemingly peaceful daily life. In the midst of this peaceful landscape, where golden sunsets gently caress wheat fields, very few could imagine the tragedies soon to unfold. This is a story about love, betrayal, rage, and obsession emotions that seem deeply human, yet have led to unimaginably cruel and devastating outcomes. Marion County, a place unaccustomed to chaos or crime, found itself confronting the harsh reality that evil sometimes isn't a distant stranger, but rather someone we know intimately, someone who smiles at us every day and speaks words of affection. Now, it's time to lift the veil of mystery covering this community, to better understand the crime that forever changed how the people of Marion County perceive safety, love, and trust between individuals. Marion County, a land of peacefulness, is about to tell a story it never wished to share. Josh Fulham and Heather Strong met when they were still so young, in the most innocent years of their lives. Their relationship blossomed from shy glances and promises, whispered as if they belonged only to the dreams of youth. They loved each other with all the passion, recklessness, and innocence that time could never erase. Yet, it was this very intensity that, when tested by real life's harshness, became a smoldering fire, waiting for the inevitable spark. 10 years together, a decade filled with countless breakups and reconciliations, with wounds barely healed before being torn open again. Josh and Heather were more than lovers. They were companions on an emotional roller coaster, soaring to exhilarating heights one moment and crashing into despair the next. There were nights when their fights echoed down their quiet street, only to be followed by mornings where they were seen hand in hand, as if the tears of yesterday never existed. Then came December 26, 2008. On a crisp winter day, they decided to bind their lives together with vows of marriage. It was a simple ceremony, no fireworks, no grand celebrations, but it carried a fragile hope that their broken parts could finally be made whole, that love could conquer all storms. But just 11 days later, that hope shattered, violently and irreparably. Josh, the man who once promised to cherish and protect Heather, became her greatest threat. In a blind rage, he pointed a gun at his newlywed wife. The moment unfolded with brutal swiftness, shouting, the cold click of a chambered bullet, and Heather's terrified eyes staring back at the man she once believed would never hurt her. Josh was arrested shortly after, but the damage had already been done, not just to Heather's sense of security, but to the very fabric of their relationship. It marked the beginning of a downward spiral, a sequence of dark events that would entangle them both far deeper than anyone could imagine. Heather, after that moment, could no longer look at Josh through the lens of unconditional love. And Josh, consumed by rage, fear, and a need for control, started a descent into emotional chaos that knew no bottom. Friends and family of Heather later said that Josh could be tender at times, almost disarmingly so, but that tenderness always carried an unsettling edge. He could turn violent over a mere look or a casual comment. Later, psychological assessments suggested that the signs of an abuser had long been present in Josh's extreme jealousy, possessiveness, and a desperate need for control long before their wedding day. They had entered marriage with the frail hope of healing, but what awaited them was not peace and harmony. It was a tragedy, slow building and inevitable, like a distant storm silently rolling toward the shore. Heather had no way of knowing that when she placed her hand in Josh's that December afternoon, she was, in a sense, signing away her life to a man who would eventually turn her love into a death sentence. And by the time the truth revealed itself, it was far too late. Since the wedding, the air between Josh and Heather had grown thick, as if a single spark could ignite a devastating blaze. Tension, jealousy, and rage weighed down every word, every glance. The early days of their marriage, which should have been the happiest, became suffocating, like walking across a minefield where one wrong step would trigger disaster. Then, that fateful night arrived, faster than anyone could have imagined. As evening fell over their small house tucked behind rows of trees, the sounds of shouting spilled out into the open air. Shattering glass, slammed doors, angry voices cutting through the night. A neighbor, an elderly woman living just a few yards away, dropped her teacup in shock. Trembling, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, stammering, "Please, send someone fast. I hear yelling. And something about a gun. I'm scared something terrible is happening." It took Marion County deputies less than 5 minutes to arrive. When they pulled up, the front door was wide open, and the inside reeked of violence. The living room light swayed on its cord, casting frantic shadows across the room. Pictures were ripped from the walls, shards of glass glittered across the floor. A sofa lay overturned, the coffee table smashed. Household debris scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had torn through their home. Heather stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, her eyes wide with fear, arms raised instinctively to shield herself. A red mark blazed across her cheek. Josh, towering and broad-shouldered, still gripped a black Smith Wesson pistol tightly in his hand. When he saw the police, he hesitated, rage and confusion battling inside him, teetering between lowering the weapon and escalating the situation into something even worse. Survival instincts kicked in. Slowly, Josh lowered the gun, letting it drop to his side. Officers immediately rushed him, forcing him to the ground and snapping handcuffs around his wrists, while another officer gently pulled Heather away, speaking to her in calm but urgent tones. Later, in their official report, police would describe the scene as a battlefield. The living room carpet was stained with muddy footprints, the walls bore deep dents from punches or thrown objects. Evidence of a violent struggle was everywhere. A shattered lamp, broken cabinet doors, dishes smashed into pieces. Heather, after calming down inside a police cruiser, told them everything between gasping sobs. Josh had exploded in jealousy over a phone call from an old friend. In a blinding rage, he screamed in her face, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, and pulled a gun from the drawer next to their bed. Heather hadn't dared to fight back. She froze, hoping he would calm down, hoping the moment would pass. But with every second, the storm within Josh only grew worse. Officers seized the firearm as evidence and took Josh into custody. As he was escorted out, Heather looked back at their home, the place that once held dreams of happiness now reduced to rubble and fear. In the harsh yellow glow of the patrol car lights, her face showed a hollow mixture of shock and heartbreak. It wasn't just the marriage that had shattered, it was her trust, her hope, everything she thought might have saved her. That night, Marion County didn't sleep peacefully. News of the domestic violence incident between Josh Fulham and Heather Strong spread like wildfire through the quiet neighborhood. Whispers filled grocery stores, post offices, and local diners. People asked themselves, how could a love that once burned so brightly crash, so violently, so suddenly? But that question, sharp and cold as a knife, would only cut deeper into Heather's life and Josh's fate in the dark days to come. After that night of violence, it seemed Heather might finally break free and walk away. But in this story, the web of fate had already wrapped itself too tightly around her to escape. Amid the fractures of her marriage to Josh Fulham, another figure quietly entered the frame. Amelia Carr, a young single mother, bearing invisible scars across her heart. Amelia was no stranger. She had known Josh before, through the tangled web of relationships in their small community. At just 24 years old, raising 3 children on her own, and burdened by a troubled past, Amelia saw in Josh what she thought was stability, a strong man who could offer protection, or so she convinced herself to believe. During Josh's imprisonment following the assault on Heather, Amelia became a regular visitor. She borrowed money, bailed him out, paid legal fees, doing everything she could to bring him back. But what Amelia didn't realize, or perhaps chose not to see, was that Josh's heart never truly belonged to her. What Josh needed wasn't love, it was blind loyalty, a safe harbor while he navigated his crumbling world with Heather. Once released, Josh didn't just reconnect with Heather. He continued his relationship with Amelia too, weaving a dangerously tangled web. He expertly played both women, charming Heather when he needed leverage over their children, whispering promises of a future to Amelia when he needed unquestioning support. Amelia, blinded by her desperate love, began slipping into obsession. She started secretly following Josh and Heather. At first, it was coincidental drives past Heather's house. Then came the slow circling at night, headlights off, heart pounding, eyes fixated on the glow from Heather's living room window. Once, Amelia crept close enough to peer through a window and witnessed a heated argument between Josh and Heather, and somewhere deep inside, a dark satisfaction flickered. She couldn't tear herself away. Even knowing Josh was manipulating her, Amelia couldn't resist when he called. Josh, for his part, exploited Amelia's vulnerabilities with chilling precision. Sweet words when needed, icy indifference when convenient. Heather became a possession to reclaim. Amelia a tool to maintain control. People close to the trio began to notice. They spoke of the strange way Amelia looked at Heather, a mixture of jealousy, pity, and something darker, harder to name. Within Amelia, a silent battle raged. The part that wanted to protect Josh, and the part that longed to erase Heather from his life forever. Josh recognized these emotions and fanned them skillfully. He deliberately fueled Amelia's jealousy. A lingering hug with Heather in her presence, a cryptic text message left where Amelia might find it, careless comments about how Heather still owed him. Every move was calculated, cold, manipulative, ruthless. To Josh, both Heather and Amelia were merely pieces on a chessboard. Heather secured his access to the children and the benefits they brought. Amelia provided unwavering loyalty and a place to fall back on. If sacrificing one was necessary to keep the game going, Josh wouldn't hesitate. But he made one fatal miscalculation. Emotions like jealousy, hurt, and desperation, when left to fester long enough, don't stay silent. They boil over into something uncontrollable. And both Heather and Amelia were edging closer to their breaking points. In those dark days, no one realized a horrifying script was quietly being written, a tragedy of blood and betrayal that would soon end not just a life, but destroy every remnant of love, trust, and hope that once tied these three people together. When everything unraveled and the police tightened their grip, Amelia Carr finally began to reveal the secrets she had hidden for so long. But her confession wasn't a straightforward admission of guilt. It was more like a thin veil, transparent, enough to glimpse the truth, but distorted, bent to fit the version she needed to believe to survive her own shame. Amelia insisted that, from the very beginning, she never intended to kill Heather. She said all she had wanted was to teach Heather a lesson she believed Heather deserved for the pain she had caused to Amelia, to Josh, and to the future Amelia had once dreamed of sharing with him. In her twisted imagination, the lesson wasn't meant to be fatal. Amelia pictured a scene where Heather would be frightened, humiliated, reduced to tears, finally made to feel the fear and helplessness Amelia had harbored in her heart for so many years. Somewhere deep inside, she craved to see Heather suffer, to see her begging, just as Amelia had once begged the world for mercy in the dark corners of her broken life. But life doesn't often follow the plans of those consumed by hatred. Once anger is unleashed, it's no longer easy to control. And Amelia, burdened by her past wounds and insecurities, grossly underestimated the destructive power of her own emotions. Amelia did not grow up in a home filled with love and safety. From a very young age, she lived under the shadow of violence. The very man who was supposed to protect her father became her greatest nightmare. By the age of 4, Amelia already knew the face of brutality, an experience no child should ever endure. Those early traumas, no matter how deeply she tried to bury them, seeped into her bones, shaped her heart, and etched fear and distrust into every fiber of her being. In Josh, Amelia didn't just see a lover. She saw a shield against the world, a man who could protect her from the monsters of her past, even if the price was blind loyalty and silent acceptance of his wrongdoings. Haunted by her memories, Amelia's overwhelming need for safety tied her to Josh like an invisible chain. Every sweet word, every embrace, every half-promise Josh offered her acted like a temporary salve, numbing the terror that lived inside her even if only for a moment. Thus, when Josh began to suggest teaching Heather a lesson, Amelia didn't protest. She didn't have the strength. She didn't have the confidence. She didn't have the will to say no. Part of her feared losing Josh. Another part of her, twisted by jealousy and hurt, believed that Heather deserved to pay. In the days leading up to the incident, Amelia drowned in emotional chaos. There were moments when she convinced herself they would only scare Heather, shake her up, and let her go. But there were darker moments too, when jealousy and bitterness surged so violently that even Amelia feared the darkness brewing within her. On the night everything spiraled out of control, Amelia was there. She saw the fear in Heather's eyes. She heard the gasping breaths, the desperate pleas. And in that moment, the fragile line between lesson and destruction disappeared completely. Later, under the harsh lights of interrogation, Amelia would repeat again and again, "I never meant to kill her. I just wanted her to know what it felt like to be hurt, but no amount of justifying could erase the truth. She stood there, she watched, and she let it happen until Heather no longer breathed." Amelia didn't plan a murder, but weakness, hatred, and old wounds conspired against her, and ultimately turned her into an accomplice to an unforgivable crime. And from that moment on, her life would be swallowed whole by the very darkness she thought she could control, leaving her with no escape. Heather Strong's final days were a slow, suffocating descent into fear. Everything around her seemed to tighten, inch by inch. The once strong, resilient woman now resembled a flickering candle in a raging storm-weary moment filled with an unnamed dread. On the afternoon of February 15, while working her usual shift at a small local diner, Heather received a call from Josh Fulham. Within minutes, everything about her changed. Co-workers would later recall how Heather emerged from the break room pale as a ghost, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, her eyes wide and haunted, as if she had just seen something too terrifying for words. During that call, Josh didn't scream or wave a gun like he had in the past. He spoke softly too, softly, and that quiet menace was far more chilling. He told Heather he had gathered enough evidence to take full custody of their 2 children. He threatened that unless she talked to him immediately, she would lose everything: her kids, her freedom, her dignity. Every carefully chosen word was a razor blade, slicing through her last reserves of strength. Heather tried to steady herself, offering a weak smile to concerned coworkers, but soon after, she slipped out of the diner without saying a word. No one realized it would be the last time they would ever see her. On her drive away from work, Heather sent a short, desperate text to a trusted friend, someone she kept hidden from Josh to protect their connection. The message was brief but chilling. "If anything happens to me, remember I was always afraid of him. I just want the kids to be safe." That tiny, heart-wrenching text would become one of the final clues to the silent terror Heather endured in her last days. Her friend, alarmed, immediately texted back, asking if Heather needed help, but no reply ever came. That night, Heather never returned home. The next morning, she didn't show up for her shift. Her phone fell silent. Her voicemail box filled quickly with worried messages from family and friends. Her absence screamed louder than any words could because Heather was never the kind of woman to disappear without a trace. Inside Heather's home, everything remained perfectly in place. Toys sat quietly in the corners where her children had last played. The fridge was still plastered with schedules, reminders, and little notes filled with hope for the future. There were no signs of hurried packing, no missing clothes, no suitcases by the door. Nothing to suggest Heather had planned to leave voluntarily. One neighbor would later tell police that on the night Heather vanished, they spotted an unfamiliar car idling near her house. The headlights were off, but the engine sputtered quietly in the dark. A shadowy figure sat motionless inside, watching. But in Marion County, a town where everyone knew everyone, no one wanted to believe the worst until it was too late. Desperate searches began almost immediately. Family, friends, even casual acquaintances who only knew Heather from the coffee shop volunteered. They scoured the woods, combed the dirt roads, peered into abandoned parking lots. But Heather had vanished, swallowed whole by the night. Meanwhile, Josh Fulham maintained a cold, disturbing detachment. He told police that Heather had simply left, that she needed a break from everything. He produced a typed letter he claimed Heather had written, an awkward, sterile document that sounded nothing like her usual heartfelt writing. When asked why she hadn't handwritten such an important message, Josh shrugged. "It's cleaner on a computer," he said, a callous excuse devoid of grief or worry. And so, in those final days, Heather Strong, the woman who had loved so fiercely, who had fought so hard for her family, was left to face her greatest fear alone. A fear no one, no matter how deeply they loved her, could save her from in time. When Heather Strong failed to show up for her morning shift, her coworkers immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. Heather wasn't the kind of person who was careless. She never missed a day without notice. In Heather's world, work was more than a job. It was freedom, responsibility, and most of all, it was the last piece of stability she clung to as her personal life crumbled. Her disappearance wasn't a small mistake. It was a blaring alarm in an otherwise peaceful community. The diner manager, after calling Heather's phone repeatedly and reaching only her voicemail, decided to contact the police. An official missing persons report for Heather Strong was filed on February 24, nearly a full week after she had last been seen. From the very first stages of the investigation, police sensed that something wasn't right. Heather's co-workers recounted in vivid detail the phone call she had received from Josh and how it had utterly transformed her mood afterward. One worker remembered, "Heather wasn't someone who rattled easily. But that day, after the call, she was shaking. She looked like she had seen a ghost." Police expanded their search, canvassing the areas Heather frequented. They questioned local businesses, combed through nearby parking lots, and knocked on doors throughout the neighborhood. A few faint leads began to emerge, not many, but enough to start piecing together a disturbing picture. One middle-aged woman, who lived just a few blocks from Heather's house, recalled something important. On the night Heather disappeared, she was cleaning her backyard when she heard the low rumble of a vehicle's engine. Curious, she looked out and spotted a small gray pickup truck parked near Heather's home. Its headlights were off, but the engine idled quietly in the dark. She saw a figure sitting inside, motionless under the pale light of the moon. The truck lingered for a long time. Then, as if realizing it was being watched, the driver flicked on the headlights and sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and unanswered questions. When police pressed her for details, she identified the make of the truck, a Chevrolet S10, the same model Josh Fulham was known to drive. Another witness, a gas station attendant working the night shift at the nearby petrol station, confirmed seeing a similar truck that night, occupied by a large man wearing a gray hoodie, lurking rather than fueling up. Those small fragments, when pieced together, began forming a chilling mosaic. Investigators started leaning toward a grim theory. Heather hadn't left willingly. Every sign pointed to something far more sinister. Someone had orchestrated her disappearance. And Josh Fulham's name sat squarely at the center of it all. When police brought Josh in for questioning, he was disturbingly calm. He spun a cold story. Heather, he claimed, had simply tired of everything and left to start a new life. He even produced a typed letter, supposedly written by Heather, naming him as the children's caretaker. But his story didn't sit right. He knew too much, offered too many unnecessary details, the kind of information innocent people rarely have. Moreover, when pressed about his whereabouts on the night Heather vanished, Josh fumbled, contradicted himself, and changed his story more than once. Meanwhile, detectives examined Heather's financial records. They discovered that her payroll debit card had been used multiple times in the days following her disappearance at various ATMs across Marion County. Surveillance footage captured a hooded figure using the card and parked nearby, a familiar gray Chevrolet S10. The puzzle pieces were locking into place. Heather hadn't disappeared of her own free will. Someone had made sure she would never be heard from again. And standing ominously in the center of this dark web was Josh Fulham, a ghostly shadow growing clearer with every uncovered clue. Still, police knew instinct wasn't enough. They needed solid, undeniable evidence to expose the truth. And to find it, they would have to dig deeper, into the darkest corners of a story woven from desperation, betrayal, and a deadly thirst for control. A few days after Heather disappeared, just as the search for her grew more desperate, an unexpected breakthrough surfaced. Detectives were notified by the bank. Heather's payroll account had been accessed under suspicious circumstances. Immediately, investigators traced the transactions. The withdrawals had been made at different ATMs across town, mostly at night, a clear pattern of someone trying to avoid detection. Fortunately, some of the aging security cameras at local gas stations and convenience stores were still operational, and they captured footage just clear enough to raise serious suspicions. One such clip, pulled from an ATM on the night of February 16, just a day after Heather vanished, showed a tall figure wearing a gray hoodie. The man pulled the hood low to obscure his face, but the broad shoulders, familiar gait, and the silver pickup truck idling nearby were unmistakable. It was Josh Fulham. He moved quickly, withdrawing small amounts of money at a time, as if trying to avoid raising any alarms. But with every swipe of Heather's card, every fleeting glance at the security camera, he exposed himself more. Detectives enhanced the footage, studied the posture, the clothing, the barely visible reflection of a license plate in the streetlight's glow. There was no mistaking it. Josh had been using Heather's bank card after her disappearance. That discovery slashed through Josh's carefully woven fabric of lies. If he truly cared about Heather, as he claimed, why would he be draining her account days after she went missing? Detectives realized they were edging closer to the truth, but they also knew this evidence alone wasn't enough to make the case airtight. And then came another breakthrough one that would drive the final nails into Josh's crumbling defense. While combing through phones and communications linked to the case, Marion County's digital forensic team recovered a string of deleted text messages from Amelia Carr's old phone. Most of the conversations were what one would expect, private laments about love, loneliness, resentment, but nestled among them was a chilling thread, cold, detached, and disturbingly calculated. A message from Josh, sent just 2 days before Heather vanished, read, "It'll be over soon, you know what you have to do." To which Amelia had replied, "I understand, everything will be fine, I'm always on your side." The words, stripped of any humanity, pierced through any remaining doubts. They didn't directly mention Heather. They didn't outline violence. But in the grim context of the investigation, they sounded like silent admissions of guilt. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered records of several extremely short phone calls between Josh and Amelia on the night Heather disappeared. Brief, hurried calls that suggested rapid updates, coordination, and nerves on edge. More chilling still, they found a small note buried in Amelia's phone's notepad app, created just days before the crime. Have to get it right, no mistakes allowed. When detectives pieced it all together, a horrifying tapestry began to emerge. Heather hadn't simply left, she had been targeted, watched, and trapped. And Josh, the man she once loved and trusted, wasn't just involved, he was orchestrating it, manipulating Amelia to help him carry out a monstrous plan. Investigators knew they were holding a dangerous hand. Every scrap of evidence had to be airtight, every narrative bulletproof. Josh was slippery, practiced in the art of deflection. If they faltered, even slightly, he could twist these damning truths into misunderstandings and walk away free. But this time, the truth had a voice. It had a face. It had cold, irrefutable footprints stamped into every line of code, every ATM withdrawal, every whispered message between co-conspirators. Josh Fulham, the man who had deceived and manipulated 2 women with empty promises, would not deceive the system this time. The gears of justice had begun to turn, slowly but with unstoppable force, ready to crush every lie he thought could save him. When the evidence was finally strong enough to close in, Marion County detectives decided it was time to confront Josh Fulham and Amelia Carr separately. The only way to expose the truth was to split them apart and exploit every inconsistency in their stories. Josh sat alone in a cramped, fluorescent-lit interrogation room. His hands fidgeted anxiously, his eyes darted to the door every few seconds, as if hoping for an escape. At first, he tried to present a calm, cooperative front, sticking to a rehearsed story. Heather had left on her own, he knew nothing of her whereabouts, and he was only concerned about caring for their children. But when detectives began to press on the details about the truck, the bank card, the text messages, Josh's facade began to crack. His answers became evasive, disjointed, increasingly desperate. Meanwhile, in another room down the hall, Amelia sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes hollow and unfocused. She was unraveling faster than Josh. The detectives, patient and precise, applied steady psychological pressure, reminding her of Josh's past betrayals, questioning his loyalty to her, planting seeds of doubt. It didn't take long. Amelia's defenses crumbled, her voice shaking. She began to reveal more than she intended. What Josh didn't realize, and what the detectives had deliberately orchestrated, was that he would be allowed to overhear just enough to know Amelia was talking. After several hours of isolation, he became frantic, demanding updates, asking again and again what Amelia had said. His leg bounced under the table, his fingers tapped nervously. His entire body radiated tension. When Josh overheard a comment suggesting that Amelia was giving them everything, he lost all control. In a sudden, violent outburst, he slammed both fists onto the metal table so hard that the entire room seemed to shudder. His face flushed deep red, his eyes wild with panic. "She's lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. "She's trying to drag me down with her." The detectives, calm and silent, simply watched, recording every reaction. In the interrogation room, words weren't the only evidence. A clenched fist, a slammed table, a slip of the tongue, these moments carried as much weight as any spoken confession. Back in Amelia's room, the breakdown continued. Through sobs, she insisted she had only agreed to scare Heather a little, that Josh had pressured her into going further. She painted herself as a reluctant participant, a victim manipulated by a man she trusted. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that Amelia wasn't as innocent as she wanted to appear. She had willingly participated far deeper in the grim plan than she dared admit. When the detectives returned to Josh, they didn't need to push anymore. He was unraveling all on his own. His lies became sloppier, his accusations wilder, blaming Amelia, blaming Heather, even blaming an unfair world for his predicament. Every word he uttered tightened the noose around his own neck. By the end of the day, detectives had what they needed: 2 conflicting accounts, glaring contradictions, and a flood of involuntary reactions that spoke louder than any outright confession. The truth was no longer buried beneath lies, it was surfacing in the cracks of their collapsing stories, in their desperation, in their betrayals of each other. Josh Fulham, the man who once believed he could manipulate everyone and control everything, was now trapped, drowning in the web of deceit he had spun. And with every passing minute, he was sinking deeper, with no way out. After hours of grueling interrogation, when all his lies had crumbled into dust, Josh Fulham finally broke. In that cold, sterile room, he lowered his head onto the table, his heavy breathing filling the silence, his shoulders shaking as if waging war against the darkness consuming him from within. The detectives stayed silent, knowing this moment, the moment when guilt, fear, and hopelessness converged to crush a man's final mask. Josh raised his head, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw and broken. He didn't dodge anymore. He didn't deflect or deny. There was only emptiness left, and a whispered, trembling confession. "I'll take you to her." No one said a word. Calmly, deliberately, the detectives rose from their chairs, handcuffed Josh, and led him outside. The Florida night was unusually cold, the damp air carrying the salty sting of distant marshes. Josh sat slumped in the back seat of the patrol car, wrists shackled, his face hidden in the shadows. The vehicle rumbled down lonely rural roads, each mile stretching the weight of silence thicker and heavier. And then, in the dim confines of that patrol car, Josh began to cry. At first, it was just ragged, breathing shallow, trembling gasps. But soon, it erupted into unrestrained, raw sobs. He turned his face toward the window, as if trying to hide from the men sitting in front, from the truth, from himself. Tears streamed down his face, blending with hoarse, muttered fragments, disjointed apologies, bitter curses at life, desperate pleas for forgiveness that even he no longer seemed sure who they were meant for. It wasn't the noble repentance of a man seeking redemption. It was the primal, gut-wrenching fear of a man realizing he had no escape, that punishment was no longer a distant threat, but a certainty bearing down on him. The car eventually pulled to a stop along a muddy dirt road, far from the last traces of civilization. Josh was hauled out of the back seat, his legs unsteady, his gaze dazed and hollow. He led the detectives down a narrow trail, the ground soft and wet underfoot from days of rain. Every step he took seemed heavier, as if he carried not just his own body, but the crushing weight of his sins. Flashlights cut through the misty darkness, illuminating twisted tree limbs and patches of razor-sharp underbrush. No one spoke. They just followed step after step, the man guiding them to the final, undeniable truth. After nearly half an hour trudging through the muck, Josh stopped before a dense thicket of reeds. He stood there, hunched over, his shoulders sagging like a man already carrying the weight of a lifetime sentence. One of the detectives stepped forward, brushed aside the tall grass, and there, in the dim beam of his flashlight, they saw it. Part of a human body, wrapped crudely in a filthy tarp, partially buried in the cold, wet earth. No one spoke. For a long moment, the world was just silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the steady hum of nature around them. They stood there, heads bowed, in silent mourning for the woman who had once fought so hard to live, and now lay discarded, hidden, forgotten. Josh crumpled to his knees, a ragged sob tearing from his throat. He didn't scream. He didn't plead anymore. His tears poured freely, mingling with the mud beneath him. He was utterly broken. The crime scene was quickly secured. Forensics teams were called in. Evidence markers placed. A careful, methodical process began. Meanwhile, Josh was led back to the patrol car. This time, he didn't resist. He simply slumped in his seat, his head bowed, his hands trembling uncontrollably in his lap. Inside the vehicle, there was only the crackling of the police radio and the distant howl of the wind outside the windows. And in that cold, heavy night, the truth was finally exposed. No more lies, no more invented stories, only a brutal, simple reality. Heather Strong was dead. And Josh Fulham, by every choice he made, by every lie he told, by every betrayal he committed, was the one who would bear the weight of it forever. The headlights of the patrol cars cast long, grim beams across the empty clearing where Josh Fulham had led them. Cold winds tore through the tall reeds, carrying with them the sour smell of mud and decay. The forensics team quickly arrived, sealing off the area with bright yellow tape that fluttered in the night air. The detectives, hardened veterans who had seen the worst humanity could offer, struggled to hide their shock at the condition of Heather Strong's body. The tarp wrapped around her had rotted away, revealing pale, muddied skin. The stench of decomposition was overwhelming, forcing some officers to turn away, covering their mouths to fight back the urge to gag. One younger detective, who had thought himself hardened to scenes like this, froze mid-step, his wide eyes filled with horror. It wasn't just the tragedy of Heather's death, it was the inhumanity of how she had been treated afterward, discarded like something shameful to be hidden away. Gently, carefully, the forensic team unwrapped the tarp under the sickly beam of flashlights. Heather's small frame was still recognizable, slight, frail, her hands curled in on themselves, her face contorted and caked with dried mud. No one spoke. The silence pressed down heavier than any official indictment could. As the team documented the scene and prepared to recover the body, Amelia Carr was brought to the site. She wasn't handcuffed, but two officers flanked her closely. Stepping down from the car, Amelia looked ghostly pale, her body trembling like a blade of grass in a storm. At first, she tried to maintain her composure, clinging to some last shred of defiance. But when the flashlight swept across the newly uncovered remains, Amelia froze. For a long second, she simply stood there, stunned, as if her brain couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. Then, like a dam breaking, she collapsed into hysterical sobs. Her cries tore through the silent night, raw and piercing, echoing through the dark reeds. She crumpled to the ground, covering her face, her entire body convulsing with grief, real or staged. No one could tell anymore. The officers nearby simply stood and watched. No one moved to comfort her. They knew tears now were far too late. Amelia kept repeating through her choking sobs, "I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would end like this." But those words, scattered into the cold air, carried no weight anymore, not against the brutal reality lying silent at her feet. That heartbreaking scene, Heather's body lying still, forever silent beneath the cold earth, while Amelia wailed and trembled before her, burned itself into the memory of everyone present that night. And when the forensic van finally pulled away, carrying Heather's body away from the haunted field, a new silence descended over the scene, not the stillness of night, but the heavy silence of justice slowly, inevitably closing in. On the day the trial began, the air inside the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Every eye was locked on Amelia Carr and Josh Fulham, the two central figures in a tragedy that had haunted Marion County. They sat just a few feet apart, refusing to look at one another, with an invisible chasm between them built from blood, lies, and betrayal. The prosecution opened with a brutal presentation of evidence, laying bare the timeline of Josh's crimes and Amelia's complicity. But the true emotional breaking point came when Amelia's family was called to the stand. Amelia's mother, a frail woman with sunken eyes and trembling hands, took the witness stand. Her voice quivered as she revealed the dark secrets that had plagued their family for decades. She spoke of Amelia's violent upbringing, nights spent hiding under beds to avoid the wrath of an abusive, addicted father. She wept as she admitted her own failure to protect her daughter, letting Amelia grow up in a home soaked in fear, distrust, and an ever-present sense of danger. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Some jurors visibly struggled, hands covering their mouths, fighting back emotion. In those moments, Amelia was no longer just a co-conspirator. She became a twisted product of an unbearable past, a child shaped by brutality into someone she barely recognized. But whatever sympathy flickered briefly for Amelia vanished when Josh Fulham took the stand. Josh walked forward with a chilling calmness, as if this trial were happening to someone else. No shame, no bowed head. He stared down the jury, his voice steady, emotionless, as he recounted his version of events. He admitted, knowing Heather wanted to leave him. He admitted feeling enraged, humiliated, unable to think clearly, he said. But when asked directly about his role in Heather's death, Josh simply shrugged and delivered a sentence that made the entire courtroom recoil. She chose the wrong person to challenge. No tears, no apologies. Only an icy detachment that seeped into every corner of the room. One juror later said she felt a cold shiver run down her spine hearing him speak. Another admitted he had to bite the inside of his mouth just to keep from standing up and shouting at the sheer cruelty pouring from Josh's words. That day, Josh Fulham wasn't just being judged for what he had done, he was being unmasked for what he truly was. A hollow shell of a man, stripped of humanity, empathy, and remorse. And in the heavy, unbearable silence that followed, it became clear to everyone present. The verdict would not only be about the crime, it would be about condemning the darkness that Josh and Amelia had allowed to consume them. After days of tense deliberation, the final verdict was delivered. Josh Fulham was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His face remained expressionless as the sentence was read, his eyes hollow, like an empty shell stripped of any trace of humanity. Amelia Carr, after her initial conviction, was also sentenced to life in a state prison, her appeal denied. Both of them, once so sure they could manipulate others and control fates, were now condemned to live out the rest of their days trapped within the prison walls they had built with their own crimes. This heartbreaking story serves as a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers of domestic violence, violence that doesn't always begin with fists, but often starts with words, control, and silent fear. If you or someone you know is caught in that cycle, please seek help, because sometimes a moment's hesitation can cost a life and the pain of that loss will never truly fade.